a lot of people think of professional wrestling, they think of how it's presented in the United States. It's where the biggest company is, where some of the biggest matches and moments have taken place, and where a good chunk of the most famous wrestlers are from. But if all the different states got together in a Hunger Games style tournament, who would their tributes be? Today we are ignoring kayfabe and talking about the states that wrestlers are actually from, as in they were legitimately born there or spent a significant portion of their childhood growing up in them. For some of the 50, we were quite frankly spoiled for choice. Others, on the other hand, hello Wyoming. I'm Adam Pacitti from the great state of Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the best wrestler from every US state. Join us. Alaska, Kenny Chaos. Alaska might be the biggest US state, but that does not mean that it has more great wrestlers than anywhere else. In fact, quite the opposite is true, as barely any famous grapplers hail from the land north of Canada. There was Yukon Eric, a wrestler from the 1940s and 50s who was billed from Alaska but was actually born in the state of Washington. In terms of performers who genuinely came from Alaska, the one with the highest profile is Kenny Chaos, a native of Anchorage, best known for his stint in WCW between 96 to 99. He was part of the team High Voltage alongside Robbie Rage, but he found his greatest tandem success as the partner of Rick Steiner. The dog-faced gremlin chose Chaos as his second after he defeated Brother Scott and the Giant for the belt single-handedly at Halloween Havoc 1998. Chaos getting injured midway through this reign was what led to Rick coming together with his ultimate tag team partner, the legendary Judy Bagwell. For being a part of that magical moment, Chaos more than deserves his spot on this list. Hawaii, Don Morocco. Some of you might have thought that Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was a lock-in for this spot, but he was born and raised in New York, though he is of Japanese and Hawaiian descent. So instead, we've gone for another wrestling legend who can definitely claim the islands as his home. The Rock! No, not that one. Don Morocco, born in the fabulous location of Sunset Beach, wrestled throughout the 1970s and 80s, making a name for himself in the World Wrestling Federation during their first big national boom period. He became just the fourth Intercontinental Champion in history when he beat Pedro Morales in 1981 and would later have a second reign with the belt that lasted for over a year. In 1985, Morocco won the first ever King of the Ring tournament, kickstarting that noble lineage, and he also found success as an occasional challenger for Hulk Hogan's world title and in a comedic partnership with fellow Hawaiian Mr. Fuji. Yes, Mr. Fuji wasn't actually Japanese. I mean, it was the 80s, are you really that surprised? Maine, Scotty to Hottie. Maine is famous for being the easternmost state in America and for being home to the city of Portland that isn't the one that you're thinking of. In terms of wrestlers, there's Fandango, who is from the non-exciting Portland, AC Romero, who used to wrestle for Impact, and one of the most over stars of the Attitude Era. I think we'll probably go for him. Sorry, Dango. As one half of Too Cool, or 1/3 if you count Rikishi, Scotty to Hottie, born in Westbrook, Maine, delighted fans with his energetic performances, signature worm finisher, and some of the greatest dancing ever seen in a wrestling ring. Again, sorry Dango. Though they were a lower mid-card act, Too Cool were always over and were in fact red hot for a good 7 or 8 months there. Scotty won 2 sets of tag titles for WWE as well as the light heavyweight championship, but his popularity and cult status is worth more than any belt. Now let's all do the Too Cool dance in his honor. Washington, Bryan Danielson. If you were expecting Batista in this spot, then I hate to tell you this, but he's from Washington, D.C., which isn't in Washington State. Instead, your options for Washington-based warriors are Swerve Strickland, who actually spent a lot of his childhood in Germany, Greg the Hammer Valentine, who traveled around Texas a lot with his father, and the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, who spent a majority of his childhood in Aberdeen. Not only is Danielson the best wrestler from the Evergreen State, but he's also one of the best wrestlers of all time, period. Technically sound, as comfortable in a high-flying duel as he is in a slugfest, and able to effortlessly connect with a crowd as either a heel or babyface, the Clam Digger has been a star everywhere he's been, from the early days of Ring of Honor to the main event of WrestleMania. Am I happy with this pick? Yes! Yes! Yeah! Alright, you get the idea. Idaho, Tori Wilson. Idaho is the state where potatoes come from. That's it. That's literally all I know about Idaho. Thanks to some further research, though, I've learned that the region isn't just the home of the starchy staples, but also the home of the ageless wonder that is Tori Wilson. The native of Boise, Idaho, started appearing for WCW in 1999 and was initially involved with Ric Flair and his son, David. She would later be aligned with her real-life boyfriend, Billy Kidman, before the company was sold to WWE. Alongside Stacy Keibler, Wilson was pretty much the only woman who transferred across during the buyout. This began a 7-year stint with the promotion, which saw her do pretty much all there was to do. Compete at WrestleMania? Tick. Manage a whole variety of wrestlers? Tick. Do a storyline where her father kayfabe died from bonking Dawn Marie? You bet your sweet booty that's a tick. She wasn't the best in the ring or anything, but Wilson was always there to do the best job she could, and that was enough for the 2-time Playboy cover girl to get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2019. Montana, Gary Albright. Montana is the 4th largest state in the country by sheer size, but its geography means it's more suitable for raising livestock than providing a home for millions upon millions of people. Flip Gordon is billed from there, but was actually born in Massachusetts. So let's turn our attention to a man who might have become more well-known had tragedy not struck. Though he was born in Rhode Island, Gary Albright grew up in Billings, Montana, becoming a state wrestling champion there as a teenager. He eventually went pro, going on to make his name first in Stampede Wrestling, but more so overseas in Japan. Wrestling for the likes of UWF International and All Japan Pro Wrestling, Albright's impressive size, power, and ability on the mat scored him several championships and even the Wrestling Observer's Rookie of the Year award in 1988. He may have gone on to do much more, had he not sadly passed away during a match in early 2000. As it is, he managed to pack a hell of a lot into those years, and in his prime was a true force to be reckoned with. North Dakota, Red Bastien. The setting for the movie Fargo is the 4th least populated state in all of America, with fewer than 1 million people living there. That left us with slim pickings for a wrestling representative, but luckily one was all we needed. Red Bastien was born in Bottineau, a town most famous for having a giant toy turtle as its symbol. Lucky town. He won championships all over America for various promotions, including in the then WWF, where he and his kayfabe brother won 3 sets of United States Tag Team titles. Arguably, Bastien's greatest contributions to wrestling came outside of the ring. His keen eye spotted a pair of rookies at a gym one day. Their names were Steve Borden and Jim Hellwig, who would later go on to become Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, respectively. Not a bad track record as a scout, eh? Bastien later served for many years as president of the Cauliflower Alley Club before passing away at the ripe old age of 81 in 2012. Here's to an oft-overlooked icon of the sport and a notable North Dakotan. South Dakota, Brock Lesnar. Whilst you might have been expecting Brock Lesnar's name to appear on this list, chances are you were waiting for him in the Minnesota section, not South Dakota. That's where the Beast Incarnate is billed from, and whilst he does have a history with the Gopher State, he was actually born and raised on a dairy farm in tiny Webster, South Dakota. Presumably, he used to practice F5 in cows after school. Lesnar only moved to Minneapolis to attend university, so spent the majority of his youth in South Dakota, which qualifies him for this here list. Fun fact, Brock originally wanted to work with explosives in the army, but was disqualified from doing so after it was discovered that he had red-green color blindness. If you thought he was scary now, imagine him working with bombs. He may not have made a military man, but Lesnar turned out to be one hell of a wrestler and one of the most unique athletes to ever grace a WWE ring. Runner-up to Brock was another MMA fighter, Shayna Baszler. Sorry about that, Shayna. Minnesota, Vern G. Though the Nature Boy Ric Flair spent some of his youth in this northerly state, he is far more readily associated with the more southern parts of America. Instead, let's talk about Flair's trainer, who was a force majeure in his own right, the legendary Vern G. Born in Corcoran and raised in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, Gagne is best known for being the founder and star of the American Wrestling Association, or AWA, which ran out of Minneapolis. He won the AWA World Heavyweight Championship a record 10 times, which included a reign that lasted for 2,625 days. The belt was also held by the likes of Fritz von Erich, Nick Bockwinkel, Stan Hansen, and Kurt Hennig, all of whom owed some thanks to Gagne's booking. It's perhaps one of Vern's biggest missteps that is his biggest legacy, as a business dispute between he and a then AWA contracted Hulk Hogan was what led to the Hulkster moving to the WWF and becoming a major star there. A legend in the ring and out of it, Gagne's contributions to modern wrestling cannot be overstated, as he pips many other notable names from the Gopher State. Wisconsin, Ed Strangler Lewis. The state of Wisconsin's greatest wrestling moment is easily when R-Truth confused the cities of Milwaukee and Green Bay that one time, but in terms of actual wrestlers, there's plenty to choose from. Roderick Strong was born there, as was Austin Aries and AWA star The Crusher, but our pick goes to a man who made his wrestling debut in 1905. Ed Strangler Lewis from Nakusa, Wisconsin came up at a time where wrestling was still largely a legitimate sport. It was he, alongside Toots Mond and Billy Sandow, who made up the legendary Gold Dust Trio, which helped create the industry as we know it today. They were the first group to promote entire wrestling cards instead of singular matches, and it was they who came up with the idea of manufacturing storylines to drum up interest around big bouts. Strangler's legitimate in-ring skills meant that the trio had freedom to run things their way, as he could easily defeat anyone who dared go against the script. An absolutely pivotal figure to our business, it's possible that none of us would be here were it not for Ed Lewis. Michigan, Kevin Nash. The state of Michigan, home of Detroit, the Great Lakes, and a place called Kalamazoo, has also given the world more than its fair share of great wrestling talent. Christopher Daniels was born there, in Kalamazoo no less, as were Rob Van Dam, the Steiners, Rhino, and Eric Bischoff, but when it comes to impact on the business, championships won, and literal size, there are few bigger than Big Daddy Cool. Kevin Nash, who was born and raised in Detroit, is one of the most influential wrestlers of the modern era, for reasons good and bad. In WWE, he was the longest reigning world champion of the 90s, but was on top during a period of creative and commercial stagnation in the company. In WCW, he was 1/3 of the original New World Order, a revolutionary heel stable that changed the business forever. On the other hand, he ended Goldberg's streak with a cattle prod, so, swings and roundabouts. For all his faults, Nash continues to be a respected figure in the business, representing the Motor City and its state like a pro. New Hampshire, Triple H. It's time to play the game, and that game is called Where the Hell is New Hampshire? It is the 5th smallest state out of the 50, there's just one city there with over 100,000 people, and it's famous for being the first state to introduce green traffic lights. Okay, it is famous for more than that, but I thought it was neat. In terms of wrestlers, New Hampshire doesn't do too badly. Former Ring of Honor World Champion Matt Taven was born there, as was former referee and manager Bill Alfonso, but there can only be one king of this minuscule region. Despite being billed from Greenwich, Connecticut, and that location being pivotal to his early character, Triple H was actually born in Nashua, New Hampshire. A bodybuilder from a young age, he even won the Mr. Teenage New Hampshire competition in 1988 before moving to Massachusetts to learn how to wrestle. If you need me to explain to you why Triple H is so important, then can you please show me the rock you've been living under for the last, almost 30 years? But it's as big as New Hampshire. Vermont's Vivian Vachon. Vermont, which ranks one place above New Hampshire in terms of size, is not a state known for its wrestling. In fact, Vermont isn't really known for much, except for being pretty to walk in and for giving the world Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Thank you, Vermont. In terms of wrestlers, we were basically left with two options. One was a guy called John McMahon, no relation, who retired in 1891, and the other was a woman who actually was part of a famous wrestling family. Vivian Vachon, sister of Mad Dog Morris and aunt of Luna, was a very successful performer in her own right back in the 1970s. Born in Newport, Vermont, Vachon performed in numerous territories, including the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, where she feuded with the Fabulous Muller, and the AWA, where she won their women's championship. Also, her initials are VV, which I find really satisfying in an entry about the state of Vermont. Massachusetts, John Cena. Easily in contention for the hardest state to spell correctly, Massachusetts is also a good place to be born if you covet a spot in wrestling history. Sasha Banks, Eddie Edwards, Tommaso Ciampa, and Kofi Kingston can all lay some claim to being from there, but come on, was there really anyone else we could have gone for aside from a man who put West Newbury on the map? John Felix Anthony Cena spent his entire childhood in Massachusetts, attending schools in Lawrence and Ashburnham before moving to Springfield to go to college, where he presumably gave the five-knuckle shuffle to Homer Simpson. The greatest of all time, if WWE are to be believed, began his wrestling career in California, moving there at the age of 21, but he has always stayed true to his New England roots. In fact, there's a song on his album called Beantown, a reference to the city of Boston. Don't ask me why it's called that, because I have absolutely no idea. Something to do with beans, if I had to guess. So sorry to every other wrestler from Massachusetts, but this one was easy. Oregon, Ken Peta. Whilst Rowdy Roddy Piper cut his teeth in the Portland territories, he was born in Canada, which I'm told is a small town in Scotland. Instead, this space goes to another Oregonian. Oregonese? Who made his name in the late 1970s and early 80s as a real-life strongman. Ken Peta, born in Portland, had a promising career as a weightlifter before he stepped into the squared circle, even qualifying for the 1972 Summer Olympic Games. He turned his attention to wrestling shortly thereafter, becoming a challenger to Bruno Sammartino's world title in the WWE. On April 21st, 1980, he became the second ever Intercontinental Champion, and the first person to actually pin someone for that belt. Sorry, Pat Patterson, nobody buys that tournament in Rio de Janeiro story anymore. Legitimately one of the strongest men to ever set foot in a WWE ring, Peta was a huge name in the promotion right before it took off as a national brand. Maybe could have been a bigger part of that period had he not gotten himself thrown in jail after he was arrested, along with Masa Sato, for fighting police officers over something to do with a closed McDonald's drive-thru. True story. Wyoming, Garrett Bischoff. When WWE.com ran a lazy article version looking at 50 stars from 50 states, they left Wyoming blank, but we here at Cultaholic do not believe in such cowardice. That being said, nobody is from this godforsaken place. In terms of famous non-wrestling people, the Cowboy State can claim the actor Jim Beaver from Supernatural, punk band Teenage Bottle Rocket, and artist Jackson Pollock, but sadly none of them ever learned how to do a Death Valley driver. The closest thing we could find to any sort of wrestling heritage in Wyoming is the fact that former WCW boss and the world's smuggest man Eric Bischoff moved there at some point. He had a second home there for a while, but fully moved to the city of Cody some years back. No idea when, but he did, trust me. So it would be reasonable to assume that his son Garrett, who was a wrestler in TNA and referee by the name of Jackson James, may have spent some of his childhood there. Maybe? Yep, Garrett Bischoff. Iowa, Seth Rollins. That's more like it. Deciding a flag bearer for the state of Iowa was genuinely one of the hardest decisions when it came to compiling this list, as two influential figures from two very different eras called that place home. First up was Frank Gotch, an early 20th century grappler from Humboldt who helped transition wrestling from a legitimate sport to a worked spectacle. He is regarded as one of the most important figures in the history of the sport, even though he died tragically young in 1917. Then there is Seth Rollins, born in Davenport, one of the biggest breakout stars of the last 10 or 15 years. Since his debut as a member of The Shield in 2012, he has done everything there is to do, winning championships, putting on great matches, and annoying people on Twitter all the while. While Gotch definitely deserves recognition for his work, in terms of professional wrestling as we know it today, Rollins is of course by and far away the biggest star. Whilst Frank would probably kill Seth in an actual fight, in this particular battle, it's the architect that stands tall. Only just. Illinois, CM Punk. Look, we could have been different and gone for somebody else from Chicago or elsewhere in the state of Illinois, but come on, it's CM Punk. Love him or hate him, the guy is seriously important. In terms of other possible representatives for the Prairie State, there was Larry Zbyszko, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Adam Pearce, and Punk's best pal, Colt Cabana. However, in terms of championships won, memorable moments, and general impact, the Second City Saint leads the pack. Also, few wrestlers are as tied to a single location as Punk is to his beloved Chi-Town, so it's only fair he gets to carry the banner for it here. A pipe bomb dropping hero to some and a selfish egomaniac to others, Phil Brooks is as divisive outside the ring as he is good inside it, on the microphone, even on commentary. His match with John Cena at Money in the Bank 2011 stands as a true highlight of WWE's post-PG output, but his actions backstage at All Out 2022 essentially put AEW on the rocks for a whole year. However you may feel about the guy, he is truly unique, even in a business full of unique characters. Indiana, the Ultimate Warrior. Jim Hellwig, who legally changed his name to just Warrior, lest we forget, is another wrestler with a complicated legacy. In his prime, he was a comic book character come to life, with rippling muscles, snarling roars, and more tassels than is probably healthy for any one man to possess. His victory over Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 remains a standout moment in the history of the granddaddy of them all, and had things been just a little bit different, he might have been the one to fully succeed the Hulkster as the company's top new guy. His well-publicized backstage issues and spiky personality stunted his career, but for many, the Warrior is still a symbol of wrestling at its peak, even with all the objectively horrendous things he said and did prior to his death. If you're not happy with Warrior as our pick, second place was Eugene, so what do you really want us to do? Ohio, Randy Savage. Macho Man Randy Savage, who may have been billed from California, was actually born in Columbus, Ohio. Son of famous wrestler Angelo Poffo, Randy was always destined for a career in sports entertainment, but few could have predicted how impactful he would be in the industry during the 1980s and beyond. A flamboyant showman, with or without the glamorous Miss Elizabeth by his side, Savage helped pioneer a hybrid style of strength, athleticism, and aerial moves, being one of the few big stars at the time to go to the top rope regularly and not look like an elephant walking a high wire. His match with Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 is legendary for a reason, and then there's his work alongside Diamond Dallas Page, Ric Flair, and of course Mr. Hogan. Another sometimes problematic figure, Randy Poffo the Man may not have been everyone's cup of tea, but as an in-ring competitor, few could touch him. Before we move on, a special shout out to Brian Pillman, Jon Moxley, Dolph Ziggler, The Miz, and Abyss for also repping Ohio in a big way. Pennsylvania, Kurt Angle. Because we couldn't put the entire promotion of ECW on this list, we have had to settle for an actual person instead. And what a person he is! Kurt Angle was born in Mount Lebanon, a suburb of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, which is where he dreamed of one day losing all his hair and spraying a bunch of people with milk. It was at high school, where he was undefeated as a freshman, and later at Clarion University, that Angle fine-tuned his amateur wrestling skills. This led to him trying out for the Olympics, going to the games in Atlanta, broken freaking neck, and you know the rest. And it's still as impressive as hell. The gold medalist's exploits in professional wrestling are even more legendary than his incredible amateur portfolio. A major star during several different eras, and one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of boots, Angle is one of a kind, and you will struggle to find any wrestling fan who doesn't love him. It's true. It's absolutely bloody true. Special mention must also go to Bruno Sammartino, who was actually born in Italy but raised in Pittsburgh upon moving to the US and became a beloved figure not just of the Keystone State, but the entire Northeast region. New York, Mick Foley. Bloody hell, this was a tough one. Do you realize how many famous bonebenders were born or grew up in New York City, let alone the rest of the state? Arnold Skaaland, Gorilla Monsoon, Chyna, the Dudley Boys, and Jim Duggan, and of course the Brooklyn Brawler. We could have had any of these, but one woman's baby boy stood out from the crowd. Mick Foley was actually brought into this world in Bloomington, Indiana, presumably flying out of his mother's womb and directly through a flaming table. He didn't spend long there though, as his family soon relocated to Long Island, New York, which is where he was raised. Some people say he never looked like a proper wrestler, but Foley always stood out no matter where he went, be it WCW, Japan, ECW, or WWE. His willingness to take extraordinary risks in the name of entertainment was second to none, with more famous bumps to his name than thumbtacks he's had to pull out of himself. A fantastic worker, a brilliant actor, and by all accounts an all-round lovely guy, Mick Foley is, simply put, one of the best ever. New Jersey, Buddy Rogers. The Though some may see it as New York's ugly cousin, New Jersey has given the wrestling world some very valuable assets. Plenty of names were in the running for this spot, including Chief Jay Strongbow, AJ Lee, Jay Lethal, and of course the Jersey triad of Diamond Dallas Page, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Canyon. But when it comes to important moments in professional wrestling history, it's hard to argue with the man who was the first holder of the most valuable prize in the biz. Buddy Rogers, who was from Camden, was chosen by Vince McMahon and Toots Mond as the inaugural champion of their new breakaway promotion, then called the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Though ill health forced him to relinquish the belt not too long after, Rogers had set the ball rolling for what would become the biggest game in town. Then, of course, there's all the stuff he did in the NWA, and the fact that Ric Flair stole basically everything about the original Nature Boy, including his finishing move and nickname. No word yet on if Buddy ever had his own line of mushroom-powered energy drinks, though. Connecticut's Mercedes Martinez. Considering that Connecticut is the home state of WWE, the biggest promotion to ever promote, you would have thought it would be home to famous wrestlers out the wazoo. We could have counted the McMahon children, who both grew up there, but we were worried that we would have caused a small riot in the comments. Even if one of them is the best professional wrestler in the world. AR Fox, Just Incredible, and Velvet Sky also qualify, but our choice is a stalwart of women's wrestling on the modern independent scene, Mercedes Martinez. Though you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at her, Martinez has been wrestling since the early 2000s, gaining experience in promotions like CZW, IWA Mid-South, and Shimmer. For the longest time, she was something of a best-kept secret, putting on great matches in a wrestling landscape that gave pretty much zero hoots about the women's game. Now a seasoned veteran, Martinez joined WWE via the two Mae Young Classic tournaments, then went to AEW where she would win gold in their sister promotion, Ring of Honor. This woman doesn't nearly get as much praise as she should, so it's about time we fix that. Rhode Island, Spike Dudley. Here it is, everyone, the smallest state in the entire US, and one you've perhaps only heard of because of Family Guy. Rhode Island is less than half the size of Delaware, the next smallest state, and its biggest city is home to fewer than 200,000 people. All of this makes it very appropriate that our pick is a wrestler known for being the odd one out in a land of giants. Little Spike Dudley from Providence, Rhode Island, first rose to fame in ECW, where he portrayed the runt of the Dudley litter. He was the storyline ire of his two bigger brothers, Bubba Ray and Devon, who took any opportunity they could to beat him within an inch of his life. During this period, Spike became the first person to take one of the greatest tag team finishers ever, the 3D. Wherever he went, Spike was popular as the ultimate underdog, the literal little guy who never gave up despite often overwhelming odds and captured the WWE Tag Team, European, and Cruiserweight gold. The fact that he could ragdoll himself while taking ridiculous bumps likely also helped his cause. Nebraska, Baron von Raschke. Turns out, a lot of famous wrestlers have been born in Nebraska. Sting was born there, but was raised in California. Gorgeous George was born in a town called Butte, which sounds suspiciously like butt to me, but grew up primarily in Texas. And who could forget the late Mike Halleck, better known as Manta? However, if you're after someone who was born in the state and stayed there, then look no further than Omaha's own Baron von Raschke. Masquerading as an evil German, gotta get that heat somehow, brother, Raschke began his career in the AWA before moving over to WWE and becoming a challenger for Bruno Sammartino in the mid-70s. His trademark claw hold was deemed so violent that WWE broadcasts would censor it with a big red X. A multiple-time singles champion, Raschke found his greatest success as a tag wrestler, winning gold with partners like Greg Valentine, Ivan Koloff, and Harley Race, but to name just a few. West Virginia, Necro Butcher. This spot could have gone to Ray Crippler Stevens, who had his heyday in 1970s NWA and WWE. But through our top-level groundbreaking research, aka firing up Wikipedia, we discovered that our man Ray was actually raised in Columbus, Ohio. So, in need of a fully-fledged West Virginian, we turn to the murky world of deathmatch wrestling. Dylan Summers, born in Pine Grove, West Virginia, is best known to fans of light tubes, barbed wire, and hemoglobin as Necro Butcher, the sadist who has put his body through some truly horrendous things over the years. A star in Combat Zone Wrestling, a promotion which makes ECW look like a children's soft play, Butcher helped pioneer indie deathmatch wrestling in the early to mid-2000s. When he wasn't having glass broken over his head or being smacked with concrete, he also rubbed elbows with some future stars of the business, including Eddie Kingston, Samoa Joe, and Chris Hero. It might not be to everybody's liking, but this style of wrestling is part of the ecosystem, and few performers have left quite as big or as bloody a legacy as Necro Butcher. Virginia, Mickie James. I still have no idea how West Virginia got to be its own state, but the North, South, and East all got bundled into one. How is that fair exactly? Anyway, let's talk about the wrestler, shall we? AEW's Adam Page is from Virginia, making it the official state of Cowboy Shiz, and this spot very nearly went to Magnum TA, one of the greatest what-ifs in wrestling history. However, for a Virginian who has made a definite impact on the sport, we decided to get hardcore. Hardcore country, that is. Mickie James from Richmond, Virginia gained global attention during her feud with Trish Stratus in the mid-2000s, a rivalry which led to the two having easily the most high-profile women's match in WrestleMania history to that point. James would win 6 women's titles during her various stints with the E and also captured 5 Knockouts championships in TNA. Her two worlds collided when, in 2022, she entered the Royal Rumble match whilst wearing the Knockouts belt around her waist. Kicked that forbidden door right in with her cowboy boot, she did. A hell of a wrestler, though she wasn't always treated the best by WWE, Mickie will always be a hero in the eyes of the fans. Delaware, the Briscoe brothers. The first and, spoiler alert, only time on this list, the job of state ambassador has been split between 2 people. Brothers Mark and Jamin Pugh, better known by their ring names of Mark and Jay Briscoe, were at the absolute top of the tag team game for so long that any conversation around the best duos of all time simply has to include them. The pair were actually born in Salisbury, Maryland, but grew up and lived their lives on the family's chicken farm in Sandy Fork, Delaware, a town so small there is no census information for it. The siblings quickly became synonymous with Ring of Honor, for whom they won tag team championships a record-setting 13 times. From early rivalries with the Age of the Fall and the American Wolves to their epic trilogy with the Revival, these two always pulled it out of the bag when it came to high drama, high spots, and high quality. Chuck in a bunch of other tag title reigns, plus Jay's 2 runs as Ring of Honor World Champion, and there can be no argument that these are the best that Delaware has ever seen. Whilst Jay is sadly no longer with us, Mark continues to carry the brothers' name and legacy with the utmost dignity. Maryland, Stacy Keibler. This designation originally seemed destined for Scott Hall, who was born in St. Mary's County, Maryland, but he was constantly on the move as a child owing to his father's military career. So we didn't feel right anointing him as this state's champion, and we have instead pivoted to a woman who was far from the best between the ropes, but a memorable presence in WCW and WWE nonetheless. Stacy Keibler grew up in Rosedale, a suburb of the city of Baltimore in Maryland. A keen dancer and pageant competitor, she was snapped up by WCW as one of the Nitro girls, but was quickly pushed into a more prominent role because Vince Russo just couldn't help himself. Originally almost exclusively used as eye candy, Keibler shared the screen with the likes of David Flair and Shawn Stasiak in WCW, and then Scott Steiner, Test, Randy Orton, and more in WWE. In the ring, she was certainly closer to the bottom than the top as far as the fighting females were concerned, but she always tried, and her charisma, dancing skills, and undeniable physical attractiveness made sure there was always a place for her on TV. Stacy became a WWE Hall of Famer in 2023. California, Rey Mysterio. It should come as no surprise that the land of celebrity is also home to some superstar wrestlers. Both Young Bucks hail from there, as did Big Van Vader, and whilst Dwayne Johnson was born in Hayward, he also spent parts of his childhood in North Carolina, Connecticut, and even New Zealand. Poor kid must have been knackered. For our pick, we have gone with a man who loves a certain Californian city so much that he named his finisher after their dialing code. Rey Mysterio might have come up as a wrestler in Mexico, but he was born in Chula Vista, a suburb of San Diego, which made it easy for him to cross the border into Tijuana. Debuting all the way back in 1989, Rey went on to master the craft of lucha libre before bringing the style to a bigger audience in the States. He has been a champion all over the world, competing at events ranging from Starrcade to WrestleMania to the first All In show. Mysterio's contributions are massive, and without him, there wouldn't be the high-flying wrestling style we all know and love today. Simply put, he's one of the greatest to ever do it, even if his son is a little git. Nevada, Charles Wright. As it turns out, there's actually more than just a bunch of casinos and hotels in Nevada. I know, I'm as shocked as you are. The Silver State is the birthplace of a man whose real name may not be known to many, but whose various gimmicks certainly influenced much of WWE programming for many years. Charles Wright first broke through for the company as Papa Shango, an evil voodoo priest who would lay curses on his opponents and famously muck up the ending of WrestleMania 8's main event. Then came Karma the Supreme Fighting Machine Mustafa, a tough guy who once stole the Undertaker's urn and melted it down into some chains. Hopefully you remember to take the ashes out first. Karma then joined the Nation, which was a sizable role, but the character Wright is best known for was something completely different, a happy-go-lucky businessman who liked to travel with a big group of his friends and co-workers. That's the most family-friendly description of the Godfather you will ever hear. For his longevity, his adaptability, and his enduring popularity, this WWE Hall of Famer takes this one by a mile. The second choice was Ryback, so you can see the bind we were in on this one. Utah Wild Bill Longson. The state best known for being where Mormons come from doesn't boast a great pedigree when it comes to producing high-quality grapplers. Robert Kinji Shibuya was born there, but was more famous in the California territory during the prime days of the Cow Palace. So for the perfect Utahian for this list, we've had to go back a long way into the past. Willard Wild Bill Longson was born in Salt Lake City in 1906, which is only about 2 years after Dave Meltzer started The Observer. An arrogant and cocky heel, Longson perfected the art of being a wrestling villain, getting crowds to hate him at a time when many believed the sport to be real. He was a 3-time winner of a title that would eventually be absorbed into the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, the last man to hold that belt before Lou Thesz created the one we know today. A standout of an era of wrestling long forgotten by most, Wild Bill is also credited with the invention of the pile driver. Colorado Too Cold Scorpio. Hailing from Denver, Charles Skaggs trained in the New Japan Dojo before returning to America to take on the country's wrestling scene. After an initial run in WCW, he then went to a pre-extreme ECW, where he got very popular as a high-flying innovator. He's widely credited with being the man who invented the 450 splash, although some other people say it was Scott Steiner. Can you imagine Big Papa Pump trying to do one of those now? Scorpio then joined WWE, where he was rechristened Flash Funk. As part of the Job Squad, he was a memorable member of the undercard, but never really climbed the ranks as he did in WCW, ECW, or in the Land of the Rising Sun. A classic example of a wrestler who was way ahead of their time, Scorpio's athletic moveset and penchant for twisty flips would have gotten over like crazy today, but they just weren't quite ready for all that stuff back then apparently. Praise also goes to Dr. Death Steve Williams, another Colorado native who is nonetheless more associated with Oklahoma. Kansas, Mildred Burke. I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. Oh wait, yeah we are. Ignore me. This landlocked state has produced 2 big hitters in WWE's recent past in Baron Corbin and Bobby Lashley, but for a woman who left an immeasurable mark on the industry, we have to travel back a long time. Born in 1915, Mildred Burke from Coffeyville, Kansas, was a major star in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, a time before WWE even existed. Alongside her husband and manager Billy Wolf, who was an interesting fellow to say the least, Burke became a huge name as one of the few female grapplers on the circuit, one who would often fight and defeat men in the ring. Burke was instrumental in introducing women's wrestling to almost every state in America, as well as countries like Canada, Mexico, and Japan. She trained some of the most famous female performers of the next generation and has been inducted into pretty much every pro wrestling hall of fame worth its salt. When it comes to pioneers, they don't come much more historically significant than this one. Missouri, Lou Thesz. When 14-time world champion Randy Orton is only 3rd in your list of all-time greats, then you know you've done pretty well as a state. In 2nd place is Harley Race, a multiple-time NWA World's Champion, the very first United States champion, and one of the most frightening men to ever walk the earth. But the top spot simply had to go to this absolute giant, figuratively speaking that is, he was only 6'2". Lou Thesz may have been born in Michigan to European parents, but he was raised in St. Louis, Missouri, which is is also where he was billed from. Beginning his career in 1932, Thez became one of the first big stars of professional wrestling in America, particularly for the NWA, where he reigned as a champion for a combined total of over 10 years. Known for his muscular physique, his abilities as a shooter, and innovation and moves such as the powerbomb and the German suplex, Thez's prowess laid the groundwork for everything that came next, and he helped train a generation of Japanese stars and shoot fighters. You can find his name in any serious wrestling hall of fame. Kentucky, Jim Cornet. If we were being strict and limiting this list to in-ring wrestlers only, then the honor of representing this state would have gone to somebody like Hillbilly Jim or Chuck Taylor. But there was no way we could leave off everyone's favorite tennis racket swinging, big glasses wearing, controversial opinion having Kentuckian, was there? Louisville's own Jim Cornet isn't just some mad bloke on the internet who hates most modern wrestling and may or may not end up murdering Vince Russo. No, he has also played important roles for several major US wrestling companies, both on-screen and behind the scenes. As a manager, he accompanied stars like Yokozuna, Owen Hart, Dan Severn, and the Midnight Express to huge title wins. As a booker, he made important decisions in WWE, WCW, and then WWE Developmental Territory, Ohio Valley Wrestling, where he helped get the likes of Lesnar, Orton, Cena, and Batista ready for the big time. A hero to some and a raving lunatic to others, Corny's career has taken him to many different places across the wrestling landscape, and while he hasn't always been perfect, he has provided us with some seriously golden moments. And if you still don't think he counts as a wrestler, then look up his tuxedo match against Paul Heyman. 5-star classic every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Arizona superstar Billy Graham. Whilst the temptation to put the boogeyman, who is from Phoenix, in this spot was strong, common sense prevailed, and we instead went for the guy who was WWE champion for the best part of a year. I know, spoil sports. Superstar Billy Graham was just that, a superstar. With a physique right out of a graphic novel and a barrage of catchphrases to match, he was one of the first to utilize promos to their full extent, delivering wild, exciting interviews to drum up more interest in his matches. At a time where only good guys really got long title reigns, Graham ruled as an evil champion for 296 days in the late 70s. In fact, for a good while, his was the longest heel reign of any world champion in WWE history. You only need to look at the wrestlers that copied Graham to gauge just how influential he was. Without the superstar, there would have been no Hulk Hogan, and just imagine what that would have looked like. New Mexico, Tex Riley. Finding a wrestling personality to fulfill the New Mexico quota of this list was genuinely exhausting. At one point, it was legitimately looking like it was going to be Freddie Prinze Jr. because he used to write for WWE and keeps threatening to start a promotion. Mercifully, we found an actual grappler from the distant past who more than fit the bill, but one whose story ended in tragedy. Russell Alvin Riley garnered the nickname Tex because he told people he was from Texas, but he was actually a New Mexico boy born and bred. Going pro in 1937, Riley found much success in the NWA's Nashville territory, teaming with Len Rossi to win the tag straps on multiple occasions, and embark on a high-profile feud with the Fargo brothers. It was around this time that a young Jerry Jarrett, father of Jeff, saw Riley and just about fell in love with him, so in a roundabout way, I guess we have old Tex to thank for the birth of TNA? In 1964, aged just 47, Riley suffered a heart attack after a match and died in the locker room, bringing his glittering career to an end. Hopefully, we've now done our bit to shine a light on an oft-forgotten wrestling hero. Oklahoma, Mae Young. Among the runners-up in the Oklahoma portion of this list were Danny Hodge, an accomplished amateur wrestler who could crush an apple with one hand, and Bill Goldberg, the manifestation of what would happen if a rhinoceros had a baby with a bulldozer. However, in a beautiful twist of fate, these two powerhouses were beaten to the punch by somebody a lot of fans know as a little old lady. Before she was a comedic icon during the Attitude Era, Mae Young, born in Sand Springs, Oklahoma, took up wrestling in the 1930s. She took on the unenviable task of performing to audiences who wanted nothing to do with female wrestlers, but she stuck it out anyway, helping to break down barriers for future generations of women. As nice as all that was, come on, you just want to talk about her getting powerbombed through a table, don't you? Well, Well past retirement age, Young would routinely take horrifying bumps and put herself in compromising positions for the entertainment of the fans. She was always a captivating screen presence, never failing to deliver in big moments, and is rightfully remembered as an indisputable and hard-as-nails legend. Arkansas Bobo Brazil. If greatness was based entirely on unintentionally hilarious moments, then West Memphis, Arkansas's own Sid Vicious would be top of this list hands down. Unfortunately, we have only half the brains he does, so we picked someone else. Houston Harris, better known as Bobo Brazil, was born in Little Rock, Arkansas before moving around to states like Illinois and Michigan. He started wrestling in the early 1950s, a time where segregation in America was still commonplace, but through his endless charisma and honest good guy persona, he was able to win supporters. In 1962, Brazil defeated Buddy Rogers for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, but refused to accept the belt as he had accidentally struck the champion in the groin. Had he not done this, he would have been the first African-American world champion in professional wrestling history. Bobo would have been a star in any era, but the fact that he was able to break down racial barriers at a time when they were still so high in American society marks him as one of the most extraordinary wrestlers to ever grace the ring. Tennessee, Jerry the King Lawler. Come on guys, he's literally the king of Memphis, how could we not choose him? With as many controversies as he had catchphrases, your feelings on Jerry Lawler will likely depend on when you grew up. To many modern fans, he's some disinterested old guy they wheel out every so often for big pay-per-views on pre-show panels and the like, and to those who lived through the Attitude Era, he is the screeching, scathing heel half of the greatest commentary duo of all time. But go back a little further, and as well as being electric on the microphone, Lawler was also a hero like no other in his native territory, commanding the Continental Wrestling Association as its top star for eons. He's been a world champion anywhere between 6 and 60 times, depending on who you ask, and his famous feud with song and dance man Andy Kaufman helped break new ground, while his infamous empty arena match with Terry Funk is credited with ushering in the star rating system with regards to pro wrestling. There is no denying that the guy can come off as more than a little creepy, but when you think of wrestling in Tennessee, you think of the king. That said, if you prefer someone less lecherous, then you can pick from Bianca Belair, Jimmy Valiant, or Jeff Jarrett. North Carolina, Charlotte Flair. North Carolina might not be able to claim Ric Flair as their own, but they sure can claim his daughter. Ashley Flair, third child of the Nature Boy, was born in the city of Charlotte, hence her chosen ring name. Initially a standout in high school volleyball, she eventually pivoted to follow her father into the family business, doing so in memory of her late younger brother, Reed. While she might be a teensy bit divisive amongst fans, understatement of the century, a look at Flair's list of accomplishments should tell you just how big a part she has played in women's wrestling over the last decade. Royal Rumble winner, first women's Hell in a Cell match, first women's match to headline Raw in over a decade, first women's match to main event WrestleMania ever, approximately 800 billion combined title reigns. To paraphrase the immortal wisdom of Scott Steiner, the numbers don't lie, and they spell immortality for Charlotte Flair. Also, she is absolutely dynamite in the ring when she wants to be. A key player in getting women's wrestling to where it is in WWE and a record breaker in every sense, the Queen beats out the Junkyard Dog and the Hardy Boys to take the North Carolina crown. South Carolina, the Fabulous Muller. South Carolina has a shallower pool of greats to draw on than their neighbour to the north, but that hasn't stopped it from producing some legends. Big Show was born there, as was Shelton Benjamin, but neither of those can stand up to a woman who is synonymous with women's wrestling, for better and for worse. Mary Ellison first became the Fabulous Muller in the mid-50s, but had been working as a wrestler and valet long before acquiring that name. At this time, no woman was bigger than Muller, as she would become the de facto female in the sport over the next few decades. She kept a stranglehold on the NWA and later WWF Women's Championship for years, with no one coming close to matching her time with both titles. She was also responsible for training pretty much every prominent female performer in America for ages, although her practices were more than a little sketchy. Muller's legacy is complicated, yes, but it must also be said that she is woven into the very fabric of professional wrestling in the USA. Texas, Stone Cold Steve Austin. When put Putting together this list, Texas was the first state we went to because, oh boy, do a lot of famous wrestlers come from there. Don't like Shawn Michaels? Have an Undertaker instead. Not to your liking? How about Dusty Rhodes, or Booker T, or Stan Hansen, or Jake the Snake Roberts? No? Well, take your pick of the Von Erich boys then. Honestly, it just goes on and on and on. But of all the names to emanate from the Lone Star State, one rises to the top, like the head of glass on an ice-cold Steedweiser. In WCW and ECW, Steve Austin, native of Austin and then later Edna, Texas, captured titles, put on great matches, and showed glimpses of the charismatic character he would become, but everything changed when he shaved his head and grew a goatee. As the poster boy of the Attitude Era, you could argue that Austin is the biggest and most popular wrestler of all time. His crusade against Vince McMahon and the corporation took WWF from the brink, turning the tide in the Monday Night War and putting them back at the top of the wrestling world, leading to a major growth in pop culture status for the entire industry. Is Stone Cold Steve Austin the best wrestler from Texas, and perhaps the best ever? Oh, hell yeah! Louisiana, Ernie Lad. Beating out the likes of Ricky Starks and Jazz, we have Ernie Lad, who grew up in Texas but was born and later returned to the great state of Louisiana. Nicknamed the Big Cat, Lad began his sporting career as a football player before switching to wrestling in the early 1960s. What made Lad stand out at the time was that he was the first black wrestler to be a major heel, something promoters had been too scared to do in years prior. Lad was so good at it though that they couldn't resist, and the large feline soon found himself in feuds with Mr. Wrestling, Dusty Rhodes, and Andre the Giant. Despite playing the villain, Lad is still held in extremely high regard by fans of this particular era of wrestling. He is in pretty much every Hall of Fame there is, including being part of the third ever batch of WWE Hall of Famers, and flies the flag high for Rayville, Louisiana. Mississippi, Kamala. Hate to break it to you guys, but the Ugandan giant Kamala wasn't actually from Uganda. Hailing instead from Senatobia, Mississippi, James Harris first got into wrestling under nicknames like Sugar Bear and Ugly Bear, which is a bit harsh. Fun fact, he was actually managed by Percy Pringle, aka Paul Bearer, during this period. He took on his most famous role in the cartoonish land of Memphis and got over to such a degree that in 1984, Kamala made his way to the World Wrestling Federation. Over the next several years, he would come and go from the company, having memorable matches and rivalries with the likes of Hulk Hogan, Jake Roberts, and The Undertaker. Kamala's time in the company was so memorable that it's easy to forget that he was only actually with WWE for less than 5 years all told. He would work elsewhere, including for WCW, and memorably in a one-off match against Bryan Danielson for the Ring of Honor World title in 2006, and lest we forget, the gimmick battle royal at WrestleMania X7. God bless you, Mr. Harris. Alabama, Bobby Eaton. Among those to call Alabama their sweet home include Deborah, the aforementioned Paul Bearer, and sensational Sherry Martel, who was very close to nabbing this spot. But instead, we went for someone whose career was simply beautiful. Spending his youth in Huntsville, Alabama, Bobby Eaton is perhaps best known for his time as one half of the Midnight Express, an extremely popular tag team during the 1980s. Whether it was with Loverboy Dennis Condrey or Sweet Stan Lane, Eaton would tear up rings across the country, especially if they were wrestling their heated rivals, the Rock and Roll Express. Outside of the Midnight Express, he was also part of the Dangerous Alliance in WCW and later the Blue Bloods alongside William Regal. He won the Wrestling Observer's Most Underrated Award 4 different times and was also pretty much universally regarded as one of the nicest men in the industry. An oft overlooked gem of a performer with a heart of gold, Beautiful Bobby may not mean much to younger fans, but to those of a certain vintage and the men he shared the ring with, he was a very special talent indeed. Georgia, Ron Simmons. A child of Perry, Georgia, Simmons is also closely associated with Florida, where he became a legend of college football. After his NFL career didn't take off, he switched to wrestling, where he once again etched his name into the history books. On August 2nd, 1992, Simmons beat Big Van Vader to become the first officially recognized Black World Heavyweight Champion, a milestone feat in wrestling still talked about to this day. Though he was never able to replicate such singles success in WWE, he would still carve out a memorable career as the leader of the Nation of Domination, and then through his partnership with Bradshaw as the Acolytes, later dubbed the APA. And yes, as the guy who provided his damn punchline, but come on, he's much more than that. Considering he shares his home state with Cody Rhodes, AJ Styles, Ken Shamrock, and Bob Armstrong, among others, the fact that Simmons stands out as a testament to his incredible career and the respect his name still carries in the wrestling world. Florida, Hulk Hogan. Our final state may have given us Roman Reigns, Michael P.S. Hayes, and the Gunn family, but there's only room for one real American in this spot. Born in Augusta, Georgia, but raised in Port Tampa, Florida, Hulk Hogan tried out numerous different wrestling characters before landing on the one that would make him famous: Hulk Hogan. Upon signing with WWE in 1983, Hogan quickly captured their world title, beginning a reign that would last for years and see the company go from ambitious territory to national market leader. Without Hogan, there might not be a WrestleMania. Heck, there might not even be a WWE as we know and love it. And if that's not enough, then how about his era-defining heel turn and formation of the NWO, a move that damn near killed the promotion he once helped build. Though perhaps a bit of an arse in real life, the Hulkster belongs on wrestling's Mount Rushmore, which I know is in South Dakota, not Florida, but I've been talking about states for so long that they've all merged into one. Cut me some slack, will ya, brother? But before we finish this video, let's travel to the 51st state, shall we? The state of Ric Flair. So it dawned on us that it would be simply ridiculous not to include Ric Flair in this list, since he's an icon in the business and one of the very best to ever lace up a pair of boots. As we've already alluded to, including Flair in an official state entry would have been complicated. While Slick Rick was actually born in Memphis, Tennessee, he was sold as a black market baby to a married couple who soon settled in Edina, Minnesota. Flair also spent several of his teenage years going to high school in Wisconsin before returning to Minnesota, where he briefly attended college. The nomadic nature boy himself put down roots in Charlotte, North Carolina. Demonstrating just how many places have an affinity for the dirtiest player in the game, several cities have a designated Ric Flair Day, with Flair holding a key to many of them. So important he gets his own state. He'll love that.